140. 140, bloody hell. I'm brushing myself off because I'm absolutely caked in crud because I've been doing a lot of tidying up. Right, I'm going to start with a coffee. Excited that our Roundstone coffee special Retropower blend is getting pretty close. We've been working on the blend. There's two that they offer in their shop, Harbourside and Escape to the Country, both of which I really like. So we're coming up with one that's kind of like a halfway house between those two, but you should go on their shop and buy them. And speaking of buying stuff, the Retropower merch at this time of year really starts to fly out the door. Obviously Christmas present related, I suppose. Mugs particularly are selling at a ridiculous rate at the minute, so get in the shop and get yours, because I'm not sure if they're going to last till Christmas or not. And beanies as well. The weather, we've noticed this week the weather being particularly cold, and with the price of the price of energy at the minute, our oil bill here I think is going to be fairly eye-watering. Right, so another very crowded workshop week. So I'm just going to stand here and gesticulate. You'll notice there's been a massive move around since last week, which was traumatic because of the amount of cars you have to move around to do that shuffle. But Land Cruiser's now on the ramp for exhaust. I think James is actually doing that at the minute. So we're building the exhaust system for that. And another job whilst it's on there actually is the transmission dipstick. We've got to make a dipstick tube for that. I mean, we didn't have the original one, didn't come with the transmission, but in any case, we've got to reroute it slightly to get it around the exhaust. So yeah, progressing well on that, and I think the prop shafts should be done. Dave Mack Props are making those at the minute, so hopefully they'll be done in the next few days as well. It'd be nice to have them on actually before we totally finalise the exhaust, although it's fairly obvious where they go. NSU, I'm still waiting. Basically, the owner of the NSU is dealing with sourcing the ball joints and top mounts, and I'm still waiting for those. The tyres for it have just arrived, so we're going to get the tyres on the rims, so we're literally just waiting for the suspension bits to get that rolling. Manta, that's right in front of me, the wheels. So we're very close to that sort of pivotal moment when we transform the look of it from this horrible scruffy wheeled machine to something that's going to look pretty special. I think I showed the wheel centres back from machining last week. They've now been painted, and we've kind of just dropped one into the rim and looked at it and really happy with it. We're just holding fire on the final assembly at the minute because the owners tempted to put titanium bolts in the split rim as the split rim bolts. So we're just trialling, because the counterbores were done for a cap head bolt, and now there might be a change of direction. We just got a couple of titanium bolts coming, a flanged hex head and a cap head, just to see whether they sit nicely in the counterbores before we bite the bullet on that. But yeah, very soon. The tyres have arrived today for this as well, so very soon, I'd say next week, we'll have the wheels assembled and it'll be rolling on its new wheels. And that should coincide with the gearbox coming back from rebuild as well, so then we can actually crack on with some build work on this. What else? The Morris, Adam and I were working on the bonnet. It's been a bit of a pain actually to get that perfect. I think Stu had it very close next door when he was doing the metalwork on it, but the latching was being temperamental, to put it simply. It's quite complicated to get the alignment right on the bonnet, and then once we'd got the hang of that, it was latching, but one side kept popping out. So we've done some changes on the original latch pins. I think they're VW, the pins that go in. And they have quite a chamfer on the back, so it's actually possible, if the alignment's slightly off, for them to pop back out, because the slider plate on the latch actually ramps up the chamfer. So we've machined those chamfers out, done a slight edit on the latch plate so they engage slightly further, and I'm really happy with it now. Put the safety catch on. It's got to the point, actually, without the safety catch, we could pull the release, and the springs gave it just enough momentum that then the gas struts took over and took it all the way open. Obviously, we've got the safety catch on, so it will never actually do that in practice, but it opens really nicely now. Pull the lever, not much force on it at all, pops up nicely onto the safety. You come around here, it's just one hand on the safety, and then it comes up on the gas struts, so happy with that now. Dean's collected all of the interior panels that I think I was just doing the layout plans for last week. So he's making a start on those now. And there's a few other little bits that George is working on. So he's just done a bezel for the radio. This was always the plan, where the radio sits in the console, there's kind of it's on a sloping section, and to make that a standard DIN-sized head unit look a little bit more tailored to the interior, we're replacing the plastic bezel that comes with it with a piece that we've custom designed to actually follow the shape of the console, to make it look a bit more like a proper installation rather than just an off-the-shelf head unit put into a slot. So he's done that. I think he's 3D printed a trial for that. And he's very shortly going to be scanning. Now we've set the bonnet position, he's going to scan the front aperture so we can design this surround for the grille, and we're also designing some little brake cooling ducts that are going to go in the sides, each side of the spotlights on that. So yeah, forward progress on that. The Camaro, John's finished laying out all the brake plumbing now, we're ready to crimp those lines. Fuel tank, he's done the pump assembly into the tank, done some trial fitting of the tank, he's ready to do the fuel lines now, which is probably the next step, and he's made a start on the power steering slash brake booster lines. It's a hydraulic powered brake booster on that, so it's the power steering pump that powers the brake booster. So we're just planning the routing of those lines, and we previously did just a mild steel fabricated mock-up radiator with the power steering fluid tank on the side of it. So we're adding the detail of where the lines are going to go into that tank for the neatest possible routing, and also we're going to have a power steering cooler on the front of the radiator as well. So we're mocking up the positions of all of those so we can then plan out exactly where in the reservoir the lines will go. So then we can send that pattern off to Concept Racing, and they will do an aluminium one for us with everything in the right place. I think John's also put the spoiler on, and it's actually the first time I'd noticed that. I've been walking around the workshop, but I've been doing loads of tidying upstairs, and I hadn't noticed it, and it looks absolutely awesome with the spoiler on. So that's that. What else? Mustang is still waiting for the wheels. Now, they did come into Southampton docks on time. I believe it's the first today, so they should be with Northants Tyres today. So I would hope early next week we'll have the wheels and tyres for that. It's been just a massive session of tyre deliveries at the minute. Utah, we've done the power steering rack rebuild. So there was a power steering leak. Although the rack was a newly rebuilt rack by, I think it was Kylie Clinton built the rack on it. It was out of their warranty because obviously we had that rebuilt fairly early in the build process of the car. But anyway, it was leaking, so we've got a seal kit, rebuilt that ourselves, fitted that back on, looks good, doesn't seem to be leaking now. We've got to do a quick check to make sure the steering wheel's still centered on that. And then we've just got, I think, 2 remaining jobs to do on that now. We're doing some downlighting on the dash, on the console, just to illuminate the switch gear that's on the console, and the DAB antenna, which I think I mentioned last week, which we're going to put in the next couple of days. So that's almost ready to go. The Cortina is ready to go. We've test driven that now, happy with that. They both came to us after the NEC show, and they both came up together on a lorry. Because the 2 owners live really close to each other in London, so what my plan is to finish Utah and then send them both back on the same lorry, so hence why the Cortina's still here. And on Kaiser, George has been working on the dash switch design, so he's now got a CAD model done of their pull switches on the dash, so we're doing some really nice knobs that'll be machined in brass and chromed, which he's just been working on. And I swear there's another CAD item on that car, but it's completely escaped my train of thought at the minute. E-Type is the other thing. The owner of that actually came up yesterday and dropped off basically all the parts bar the engine, which is being built somewhere else. So that then sparked a furious tidying session, which is why I've been up on the mezzanine a lot, and me and Adam went through and have done a long overdue tidy up of all the shelves, basically consolidating things a bit better, getting rid of the shelves where there was only a handful of parts left for the cars that are nearly finished, condensing everything, tidying everything, relabeling all the shelves, to get to the point where we've freed up a couple of bays up there now to get the parts on for that E-Type. So we've literally just gone through all those parts, basically listing what we need to replace new and what we're hanging on to, which will now be put up onto storage on the shelves. As is often the case with restorations on cars where a lot of the parts are available new, there's not actually that much of the original stuff that we're going to be keeping. That's not to say the repro parts are always that good, so you've got to keep a bit of an eye on that, and from experience we kind of know which bits will be good and won't. So, you know, where there are certain parts where it's definitely not going to be a good reproduction, we'll refurbish the originals. But there's a lot of instances where it's just straight to, yeah, that's no good, you know, most of the interior for a start. And there are certain things we're upgrading, so all of the wiring, we're not using any of the original loom. We're going to run the engine on a probably Motec or ECU, master ECU, and we'll do PDM based electrics on it, and we'll do a mil-spec loom in it, so there won't be any of the original wiring loom. The instruments are going to be reproductions of the originals, but built with stepper motor drives, and they'll be controlled via a CAN bus converter that takes the signal from our ECU, whatever make we go for. It'll take a CAN signal from that and convert that to power the instruments, which means you only then need one set of senders. So rather than having, let's say, a coolant temp sender for the ECU and a coolant temp sender for the instrument, and it's duplicates for everything, so oil pressure, etc., etc., you just have one set of senders feeding the engine ECU, and then the data from the engine ECU just via two wires connects to another little ECU basically that then feeds the instruments, which just means that you minimise the senders you've got, and that everything is definitely reading the same. So whatever you're seeing on the instrument is also what the engine ECU is seeing. So it gives you a little bit of peace of mind there as well. So yeah, lots of upgrades under the skin. So with the combination of the upgraded parts and the fact that a lot of the other parts are available new, actually the amount of stuff, original parts of the car that we're using is fairly minimal. But it's still worth going through that process of looking at the condition of the parts, listing what needs replacing, and you start to formulate a shopping list then. So yeah, that's basically where we're at here. When I was talking about Kaiser, I had this in my head that George was doing some other CAD work. It's this that he's doing the other CAD work for. So the rear light, he did a design for the rear light surrounds here a while ago, and we just did some refinement on that to just refine the positions of the LEDs that are going to be in there. When we wired those LEDs, it's all going to be potted with like an epoxy compound which is poured in from the back, so working on the way the damming works for that, so we can flood it with the potting material and it doesn't run out everywhere. So we've refined the details and they're ready now to be made. They're going to be, I think we're going to do those as a 3D printed final part in nylon. Ditto these vents, and then he's been working on a design for a little badge that will sit here. This is actually the hole for the reverse camera, but we're going to do a little badge that sits in here that incorporates the reverse camera, and then there's a retainer plate on the inside that bolts that up, and the camera actually mounts to that plate. So he's been working on the CAD for that as well. So bit of CAD work going on for this, and then we should hopefully be getting the front louver panel through in the next, I would say, couple of weeks. Certainly should be this side of Christmas. So yeah, good few little bits of progress on that as well. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Nat in the metal shop, which probably is where the bulk of the work's been going on this week. Actually, it seems completely manic every time I pass through there. So I'll hand over to Nat to fill you in as to why that is. I'll see you next time.
Right, well, thank you, Cal, and welcome to another Retropower Uncut from the fabrication workshop. And you join me at the Project Kuma Mark 1 Escort, where Sam, who's finally on camera a little bit, is inside the car here doing a bit of fabrication in the back. He's been cracking on with all this rear area that he's sat in at the minute, getting the rear rail sections done as the main sort of first part. The turrets got put in last week. And I don't think we showed this particularly well on the Project 1 Escort when Tom was doing that, because I think it all pretty much got wrapped up quite quickly. So that's an example. Sam's knocked these up, which are the rail sections that go around the turrets to basically divert the original Escort chassis rail around the rear suspension turrets and back into the rail again behind that. So that's just an example of one of those. Obviously that'll be a closed section once it's all welded in place. That'll be welded around the turret, and then the ends basically join both the rails. I'm holding it the wrong way around actually, because that way around, but it's welded around the turret and then it's welded to the rear rail both in front and behind the turret, and then the floor section then sits on top. The floor's plug welded to that edge there, so that edge is welded around the turret and to the rail each end. So yeah, he's done a nice job of those, got those made up. So he's just got the other one in place now. He'll be welding that one in a minute. And he's also made the side sections for the rear raised floor box, where the rear subframe sits and where the dips sit. Ow! Ow! Right, so he's made he's basically making this this boxed rear floor section, which is the same as the other car. We're basically duplicating all of the main structure. It's being duplicated between both cars. We'd actually made these sections before. When I made the press tool, I made these sections up then so that the press tool didn't get lost. So both those bits were made, so he's fitted them, cut the floor in exactly the right point here to get them set correct fore and aft, and meeting in the middle and all done nicely. Then made these sections up to go each side and put the shape in them to follow the rails. He's made the triangular sort of capping lids that go onto those two bits, and had to play with the bead roller, putting the bead steps into those. So now it's onto the rails at the back. Get those two rail sections in, then fit the triangular sections to each side, make the centre section of that rear box, and then carry on making the floor and working back from there. So plenty of welding and plenty of fabricating to carry on with. But anyway, this is Sam, so our latest fabricator, who's over here back from New Zealand. So yeah, you'll see plenty more yet welding and fabricating yet to come. So we'll move on from there. We're going to go over to the charger next, where we have acres and acres of metal. A lot has been going on this. Several of us have been working on it. In fact, most of us in here at some point or other have been working on it. Literally, Gaz is lead loading live on TV right now.
With a mask on.
With a mask. With double health and safety, because we're going to get quizzed about that. People keep asking about that. Yes, we have fume extraction, which we use. We don't always wear a mask, but we do always have the fume extraction on when we're working with the lead. And we're just a little bit careful in trying to keep it cleaned up. We basically vacuum up pretty regularly, make sure we get all the lead up that's lying around, keep the fumes extracted, and we don't use it that much. If we were doing it, if you were in a production facility like Jaguar in the 1960s, and you were lead loading cars day in, day out, you would probably be, your exposure would be a lot higher, and you would want to control things a little bit more. But with the fume extraction, sensible cleanliness levels, it's not really a problem. It's just common, most of it's common sense really. Don't breathe it in, being the main one, and don't go eating it, and wash your hands before you eat anything. But anyway, yeah, Gaz is lead loading that. He's been doing quite a lot of lead loading. Bit really obvious here, right here, where the sail panel on the quarter meets the roof. He's leaded that. He's done various bits of lead work around the window apertures, some bits on the front corners, front window aperture. He's got to lead the sills. We're going to put invert the car on the rotisserie. As soon as he's done that bit and a couple of other bits, and as soon as we finish filming, we're going to then get all the panels off the car so that we can put it on the rotisserie, do those two bits of lead on the sills, and then we'll get the car in for blasting. The plan is now to blast it on Monday. I'm here, this is Thursday afternoon. We should be blasting it on Monday is the plan. Then we can zinc metal spray it and carry on. But yeah, other than that, we've done a bit of panel alignment, a little bit of fiddling with the doors, bit of twisting, bit of fettling around with the doors to get them to line up. Welded up some holes that were pre-existing in the doors from where they'd been repaired in the States and pinpulled in the States prior to the car coming over here. So Tom's welded those up. Tom's done a bit of repair work on this front wing down here. There was a section where it had been repaired right on the swage line, and it had put a curve in the swage line. And with a swage line, it's very hard. Once it's curved, it's very hard to get that curve back out. So we've cut that section out and just remade that repair and repaired it without the curve in. I've spent a bit of time on the boot lid. The boot lid was very, very poorly. It had been in an accident. It was a real dilemma as to whether to replace the boot lid or try and persist with this one. And there's pros and cons to both sides. The easy option would be to buy another one. There are two downsides. One, the delay in getting it. Two, the cost of it, because there were 900 quid before getting it delivered from the States, and inevitably quite a big delay in getting it from the States. But also, we know from previous experience that also aftermarket panels have a tendency not to fit. So the seesaw was pretty much in balance on that, and I opted for repairing. Now Gary's cursing that because it is in a bit of a state, and when I cut the damage out of the back and made the new rear edge for the damaged section, it exposed the fact that really it had buckled the skin quite a lot, and the skin has now gone slack. So I've spent quite a bit of time yesterday shrinking various parts of that skin to try and get tension back into it. and it is a bit of a state. We have got quite a lot of work to do on that boot lid. It is going to be a pain. Of all the panels on the car, that's going to be the one that's a real trial. The problem is, going into slightly more detail, is they're a very flat panel. And anybody who's worked with this sort of thing before will realise that a steel panel relies on tension and compression in the surface of the material to maintain its shape. So where there's a curvature like that, if I press it, I'm working against the pressure on that piece of steel, which is keeping it in shape. The problem on a big flat panel is the amount of pressure required is tiny to keep that shape. So if you relieve that tiny amount of pressure anywhere, the panel loses its tension, or compression, depending on what it's in, and will have no strength at all, and then just becomes wobbly, and you can't sand it. There's nothing you can do with it. It just doesn't hold its shape. And it's such a fine margin between having the correct amount of tension and having no tension at all, that it's really, really difficult to get the panel to hold its shape. And that's a battle we're going to be fighting for a little while with this. I think it's going to be worth fighting, but it is going to be a pain. So, yeah, Gaz is just leading up where I'd put the repair in. I've lost the radius here. Again, the panel was bent right through that radius, and it had kind of gone too flat. And where I've welded the piece in, it's so difficult to get that exact radius where that was welded in that I've kind of got it somewhere broadly near, and Gaz is going to finish making that radius with lead and file that to shape. And then I've got to go back on, as I say, go back round with the spot weld shrinker and just put a couple more shrinks in to try and get the tension right on the boot lid, because it's not correct at the moment. The other problem is, while I'm talking on problems, is that every time you apply heat, it changes the shape of the boot lid. So where Gaz is leading it, it's going to change the shape of it. There's a reasonable thickness of lead needed, so I'm banking on the fact that while it changes shape, it will then go back as it cools down, and then that can be filed to shape with it cool, and there shouldn't be any problem. But we'll find out once it's cooled down and gone back to shape. Other things we've done, Gaz has drilled the holes for the trim clips around the window apertures, so that we can put that we can trial fit all the strips. Yeah, Gaz has put the holes in the rear window aperture for the little clips, the paint removing clips. Basically, there's a set of clips that go around the window apertures, and then the chrome trims. I think they're actually stainless. I can't remember whether they're stainless or chrome. The trims that cover the edge of the glass and basically make up from the edge of the glass to the edge of the body, and push in and neatly shave off all the paint and cause a load of rust around the window apertures. We'll remove that problem by zinc metal spraying around the window apertures, so that when inevitably some of the paint gets removed, it won't then just start rusting straight away. We'll do those. As I say, obviously last week you saw all the panels being stripped, all the paint being removed and getting everything back to bare metal. We also found a few horrors on the bonnet. Again, we're sticking with the original panel for our sins. Have we made the right call? Not completely sure, but a replacement one, that's an original bonnet. I can guarantee a replacement one isn't going to match that in terms of size, and that one fits really well, and it's super heavy duty, and it's generally a pretty nice panel. So I think the plan is we're going to stick with it, and we're going to repair it, put some lead in the pitted areas. We've welded up a couple of pinholes in it with the TIG, generally tidied it up. We're pretty confident that's going to be will make a decent panel, so we're going to stick with that as well. Other than that, the rest of the panels on the car are remarkably good. Everything's pretty straight. There's a few little dinks and things that need tidying up. Tom's going to go around those and just tap those up and tidy up anything that's on swage lines, like that dent there and a couple that are on the wings. He's going to remove those so that we've not got errors on the swage lines, because that really does make it very hard to block sand if the swage lines aren't dead on. So we're just going to go around and make sure the swage lines are all dead on. Then we're pretty much there. Tom's also done a bit of work. He's put the the spare wheel brackets inside the boot, and he's fitted a second exhaust hanger underneath. He's had a single exhaust hanger. The owner wants a second exhaust hanger fitting on the other side underneath, so that he can run a twin system. So Tom's also put that in, and we've removed the original wiring covers from along the inner sills. Gaz took them out yesterday. We were musing over them, and we know that A, we can't blast under them properly with them there. And B, they're going to flap about when we blast and probably snap some of the spot welds off anyway, because they'll vibrate and flap as we blast near them, and we can't get paint under them without bending them up. Once we bent them up another time, they start breaking their tabs. So we've removed them, and then if the owner wants to keep them, we'll spot weld some extra tabs, some new tabs to them, which can then be screwed down, and we'll make them so that they can be screwed in place, and then you can put some captive nuts or riv nuts into the inner sill and then screw the covers on, which will be a lot neater and a bit more. less cheap than the original method, but much neater and much nicer way of doing it. So a little modification there. And a couple of edges being welded up on the panels to get the gaps right, and a bit of messing around with the gaps. The rear panel had a bow in it, which we've had to push out, so that's been sorted as well. But yeah, other than that, I think we're pretty much at the stage now where it's going to be getting it in for blasting. Sorry, another bit I've missed. Getting these, I call them a hockey stick trim. I don't really know what they're supposed to be called, but these trims here, which are cast zinc alloy, they didn't fit particularly well. For two reasons. One, these are replacement quarter panels and they're not quite the same shape as the original. They're not terrible, they're pretty good, but they're not quite the same shape as the original. And also the car had been in a not huge rear end accident, but that side, which is the reason the boot lid was damaged, that side has been hit fairly well, and the zinc trim for that side had been bent. So we bent that straight. One of the pins on it had snapped off. So the boss that the pins actually cast into was intact. So we've drilled and tapped the boss and put an M6 stud into one of them, just so that they've both got all the three fixing studs all intact. And then Gaz has done a really nice job leading up the back of the quarters, then filing the zinc. The zinc trims are quite thick, so you've got a little bit of material you can file on them as well. So he's then filed the lead to the zinc. And so we've got a bit of lead in the quarter, a bit of lead on the back of the quarter, and we've changed the zinc thickness very slightly to get everything to blend in really nicely. And we did a little bit of bashing of the quarter panel that side just to take that curve. That shape there wasn't quite right that side, so we've just knocked that down a bit, filed it all together, and it's all looking pretty good. We've got a bit of a faff with the boot lid gap this side, but that's looking pretty good as well now. We've got that somewhere near, so yeah, we're pretty happy with most of it. Boot lid probably being the exception to that, but I think we're going to persist with that because it's the final piece of the jigsaw. So moving on from this, we'll go along to Churchill, which Stu's been blitzing ahead with, and he's now got the bulkhead panel all welded in. There's been quite a bit of work around getting that to the stage where he could weld it in. He's done some metal finishing work on it, dressed off all the previous welds that were put on it, from actually spot welding the various sections together. So he's dressed all those off, nitpicked the metal shaping on it, got it all to fit without any tension in exactly the right place, and then he's been MIG stitch welding the ends of that in, getting all that in place, then getting the bottom edge of that welded to the main tube, bulkhead dash tube, getting that sorted out. He's also then finished the main the centre transmission tunnel section, the sort of fireplace pieces I called it before. He's got all that welded in. He's got the transition section, the conical section at the front of the tunnel welded in. He's got the transition from there to the main centre cross brace in the chassis welded in, with all that joined up and all together and finished welded. I'm just trying to think what else I've missed on the inside. I'm going to go and stand on a little step and have a look in to make sure I haven't missed anything. Yeah, so he's got all that welded in. He's got some welds there that to dress off where he's got the two sections tacked together. That's all done. He's finished off doing the transmission selector mount. Can't remember if we'd already covered that, but he's got the transmission selector mount all fitted in place on the tunnel and everything all aligned there. And he's pretty much got all of the bulkhead sections all finished welded. I'm just looking, that's all welded now still, all the the underside section of the bulkhead as far as it can be now. Along the main tube. Yeah, so it's basically all welded now apart from the main, where the main long wide bulkhead section joins down to the cross tube. So it's just that section left to weld now. So that's great progress on that. That's I'm sure Stu will be very happy to see the back of that part of the job because it's been quite challenging, quite an enormous task because there's not a lot of room. There's a lot of mechanical stuff, an enormous number of things to navigate away around, and some quite complicated shapes involved as well. So it's been a bit of a pain. And then he's moved on to this area of the inner wing where we're putting an air duct, the air duct that feeds the HVAC unit, which is just down there. There's a spigot coming out of the bulkhead just down there. That's, let me put my coffee out of the way. Yeah, there's a spigot just down there, 4-inch pipe that comes forward out of the bulkhead, just low down, just above the cross tube. And we're going to feed forward from that, then through the inner wing this way, and then feed along down so that we can pick up an air feed at the front. Is the air feed coming in through the spot lamp? Through these? No, through here again, or is it? Additional. Right, yeah. Yeah, so we've got an air feed coming in here, as Stu's just said. So we've got an air feed coming in here, which we're going to pipe up and then pipe along and then out through the inner wing. So we were considering ways of doing the adapters on that. To do them in steel, it's a bit heavy, so we've concluded we're going to 3D print a plastic adapter to do the 4-inch feed sort of back and through the inner wing and back again. To do that adaptation with a flange on that bolts to the inner wing. The problem is that particular area of the inner wing has got quite a lot of contours in it. It's not a problem to navigate the contours. What we can do is scan that, get that in CAD, and then create a surface in CAD, and then use that as the flange to put the pipe through, generate it in CAD, and then 3D print it. But it was ridiculously complicated because of the bits fitted there. So Stu's cut out the really troublesome bit and created a simpler sort of curve that fills in that section and makes the inner wing more of basically there's a mounting now. I think it was, you say it was for the wiper motor you thought originally? That mount, yeah, it had the wiper motor mounting pad on the inner wing, which was a sort of a D-shaped sort of swaged in section, which isn't going to be needed because we won't be using that there. We'll be putting the wiper motor inside behind the dash. So he's taken that out and basically made that a smooth section in the inner wing, so it just follows the general curve of the inner wing. It looks a lot neater. So he's made that a smoother shape, and then George can scan that area and then we can generate the part from that. Just makes it a lot nicer. And then Stu's done the cutout in the inner wing then, so that part can that 4-inch tube can transition through once we've printed it. So yeah, that's all progressing really well, coming together nicely. So the dash is done, and Stu, I imagine, will be very happy to move on to other parts of the car very soon. So yeah. Yes, sorry, I missed a piece as well. Yes, sill cappings. The other part that Stu's been working on is the finishers for the ends of the sills, because they were just the open ends. Were they just open last week? I lose track now.
I've done this one. This one's been done.
Right. It was just finishing the other side. Yeah, I lose track of it because I'm working in my own little void over there. I lose track of exactly what Stu's been doing. Yeah, he's basically both sills now matched the same. He's made these sections up to tie the ends of the sill in. It's a lot stronger than the original setup. Wasn't particularly robust on these, and also he wanted to make it so it tied the load into the end of the tube, because if you have seen the prior episodes, you'll realise that Stu's put a 4-inch tube through these sills, the full length of the sill, 4-inch 16-gauge tube, which is plug welded and puddle welded all the way along the inner sill, and it actually sits inside the inner sill on a Mark II Jag. Has basically a 4-inch or more or less right curve to the inner sill down to the floor pan. The tube's now sat into that and puddle welded into that to give a lot more beam strength along there, and then these just tie into the end of that and then transmit that into the bottom of what I would call the A panel, which then ties the strength up, sort of acts as a big cantilever on the end of the bulkhead. So that's now done both sides, so that's sort of strengths all in, which means then you can move on to doing obviously that needs to be done before the wing work carries on. So that's pretty much where we're at on Churchill. On to Project 1 Escort. Lots more things going on, a lot of the detail work going on this. So I can see it, because I've just seen it right in front of me, I'm going to pick it up. Cal has found an Audi throttle potentiometer unit that seems to be quite a decent setup. I don't know what Audi it's from, Cal would know, but he's found quite a nice unit that will work with a pedal that would be reasonably easily modifiable. So Bobby's working on that, working out making up a throttle pedal from bar that's going to fit in the Escort with the right length, have the right feel, and just work with the other pedals and enable us to be able to do heel and toe when driving. And basically just getting the throttle assembly to all work together. Scott's Scott's now currently working on the mountings for the passenger seat, which he couldn't do last week because he hadn't got any tube. I've now got the tube in thanks to Phil, Proformance Metals at Daventry. We generally get all our seamless tube from them. So anyway, we've got the tube now, 1.25 inch 12 gauge tube for the rear half of the front seat mount. So Scott's cracking on with that now and getting that done. And then Bobby's also been working in the engine bay, doing some slightly awkward plumbing arrangements for the HVAC unit. I'm going to walk around here and point at stuff again. In the engine bay, you may remember from previous episode, he'd mounted the 12-volt compressor for the aircon down there. He's now been working on the pipe work for it to keep it all out of the way of everything. So he's put the mountings in for the Stouff clamps that clamp the pipes for that, got them on the inner wing. Got the bulkhead fittings in, which I think are from T7 Design. He's got they do some nice double spigot billet bulkhead adapters, and they're just finished. Rather than using single bulkhead fittings, which then tend to spin and turn and whatever, it's nice to have a double one that goes through the bulkhead. It just looks neater. We've used ones that we bought via Vintage Air. I don't actually know who makes them previously, but they tend to have 4 spigots. These are a double spigot one because we wanted to split this and have the air conditioning, the coolant pipes, refrigerant pipes that side of the engine, and the heater cooling water, the hot water pipes this side of the engine. So he's got those fitted. We've got a reasonable idea of where the pipe runs are going to go. We've got some hard line to make up yet for the heater feed this side, and then obviously we'll duplicate it for the second engine. But we're going to leave that job until we've got the final engines from Sherwood rather than the mock-up engine, because I need all the ancillaries in place and the cam belt in place and everything else, just so we can see what space we've got, because I think it's going to be very, very tight on the engine there. And then yes, in addition to that, Scott has also been working on the transmission tunnel, finishing off making up the top section finisher for the transmission tunnel for the gear sticks around. It's all quite tight, it's surprisingly tricky, again, as usual with everything really, surprisingly tricky job in that there's not much room between the seats. An Escort's quite small. These seats are not big seats, but they're big when you try fitting them in an Escort, and having a slightly larger than standard top on the transmission tunnel. So he's been making the top so that will accept the gear stick, a nice gear stick gaiter, have room for the gearbox to move that bit and rock that little bit as the engine moves under torque loading, so it doesn't contact anything, but also have clearance on the seats, so it's not rubbing on the seats either. So he's been doing a nice job of making up that new tunnel top, and I think he's just about getting there with that. And I think that, and that's the other thing, it's staring me in the face. Bobby's also blasted up the scuttle grill, the air intake grill for the heater here. He's got that all blasted. We'll tweak the shape a little bit on that because there are a few slightly bent bits and a few slightly damaged bits. So he's tweaked that, tidied that up, and got that to sit nicely and got that all fitting properly. So yeah, that's all looking pretty good as well. So yeah, progressing nicely. We're at that detail stage. Going to take a little while at this stage. There's quite a lot of little bit nitpicky jobs that are, are going to take us a little while. So the progress won't appear that dramatic on this for a while, because this is the stage that eats time, but means that things are then faster further down the line. So that's pretty much where we're at on that. I'm going to wander back this way, and we'll pick up a few other jobs, because there's a few varied things going on sort of under the generic umbrella of body shop. Obviously Gaz has been largely working out here, doing the lead work and panel fit up work on this week. Mark's done a few little bits on that. Mark's had a couple of days off as well. George has printed up these alignment fixtures and hole checkers, basically, for the headlamp recesses on this, because the body shop guys have been basically working from the original shape, and that's about it, because they've had nothing else to go on in terms of doing that shape sculpting. So George has 3D printed these in PLA, drawn these up and 3D printed them with some fixture points there, so we can put a fixture across the car to pick up on these parts to keep them aligned to each other. And then those will then go in the holes, basically give us the headlamp alignment, headlamp recess alignment, make sure they're symmetrical, and make sure that the holes are the same shape both sides and the right shape to accept whatever we draw to go into them. So George has been doing that, and also the guys yesterday, I think it was yesterday, lose track which day, have put the bonnet back on the car for the final sort of fit up check. And then at some point in the next couple of days, then that'll be going back into the body shop for the final sanding. Once the other one of these is printed, then they'll be getting that in. Well, we'll be juggling tasks, I think. Between that and the Charger, they'll be working between the two. But basically, getting the book on the E-Type finished off, getting the headlamp recesses finished, and getting that sorted out, alongside working on the Charger, doing all the panel prep on that. And then the other thing that's going on, talking of panel prep, is the carbon panels for the 2 Mark 1 Escorts are being worked on. We're doing the primary sort of stages of rough prep at the moment on those, doing the prep work on the backs of them. They're wet lay carbon panels, they're being painted regardless. They're a little bit wavy here and there, there's bits of work needed on them. So they're doing the sort of basic prep work on those ahead of, we wanted to get ahead where we can on these things, but we can't go too far with them because we need them mocked up on the car to progress very much. And we can't do that until we've got the wheel arch extensions grafted into the front wings and the quarter panels, because inevitably grafting those into the front wings is going to slightly change the shape of the front wings, which we'll then need to adjust and tweak and fettle and fiddle with. And at that point, that could change how that flows into the bonnet. So there's literally no point trying to get the shape of the bonnet, get the edges of the bonnet exactly right at this stage until we've got the wings finalised and pegged in place. We won't weld them in place until after the zinc spraying and after the final blast, but we will panel pin them in place to get all the alignment locked in, so it doesn't change. And at that point, then we can look at the alignment with the bonnet, look at the front end alignment. But until that point, there's no point sort of furthering that. I think that pretty much ties up where we're at in here. The Jensen's parked in here at the minute. Nothing changed on that just at the moment. We're waiting on KS Composites for that. They're working on the main body shell and the 2 side sill mouldings in carbon, and we will wait to hear from them. I think as I mentioned before, I think the last I heard was around Christmas time, so approaching rapidly, having the body shell for this hopefully, and then things will start rolling on that front as well. But I think overall that pretty much sums up where we're at this week. Seems to have been quite a busy one so far. We're only on Thursday, so yeah, we shall see you all in a week's time.